We moved to the city to escape our family curse. But the first night in our new apartment, the sink ran by itself, and the water smelled like the river from my childhood ritual. That's when I realized the land didn't let us go. My mother used to say something that sounded like a joke, until it wasn't. She'd look out over our farmland flat, endless, quiet, and whisper, "This land feeds us, but it also remembers us." I grew up thinking she meant weather, seasons, harvest, but what she really meant was this. In my family, you don't just inherit property. You inherit a debt, and the debt always comes due when you think you're finally safe. I'm telling you this now because if you ever felt like your life is being pulled by something you can't explain, like the same patterns keep repeating, like you're fighting a battle you never agreed to, then you'll understand what happened to me. Because the worst part of my story isn't the ritual. It's the moment I realized my mother didn't raise me to escape it. She raised me to survive it. I grew up on a farm that had been in our family longer than anyone could prove. The kind of place where the roads don't have names, just directions. Turn left at the dead tree. Drive past the old chapel. Don't stop by the river after sunset. That last one was the only rule that felt serious. Because of my family, every firstborn is baptized twice. Once in church, and once somewhere else. The church part looked normal from the outside. White walls, wooden pews, a pastor with gentle hands. But the second baptism was never discussed. Not openly. It wasn't a story told at dinner. It was a thing you noticed, the way you notice adults going silent when you enter a room. I remember being 6 years old, waking up before dawn. I thought I heard my mother crying. But when I crept down the hall, she wasn't crying. She was whispering, her forehead pressed to the bedroom door like she was praying to it. And behind that door, my little brother was asleep. That was the first time I realized the prayers in our house weren't always for protection. Sometimes they were negotiations. When I was 7, my grandmother finally let me see the river, not the pretty part where kids skip stones. The other part, where the water runs darker, where trees lean inward like they're listening. She took me by the wrist, tight enough to hurt, and said, "Don't look into it too long." I laughed. I thought she was being dramatic. But then she showed me the stone, a flat rock half buried in mud, with symbols carved into it, old, uneven lines that didn't look like any language I recognized. She traced them with her finger as she knew them by heart. And then she said something that made my skin prickle. "This is older than the church, but the church knows it's here." I asked her what it meant. She didn't answer. She just pulled a small bottle from her pocket. Inside was clear liquid, maybe water, maybe oil. She tipped it into the river, and the surface rippled strangely, like it was waking up. Then she touched my forehead and murmured, "Marked." And in the distance, from the direction of the chapel, a bell rang once. Not the normal Sunday bell. Just one heavy note, like a warning. I didn't understand any of it then, but I would, because the river didn't forget my face. As I got older, I started noticing the pattern, not in a scary story way, in a quiet, painful way. Every generation had a missing firstborn, not always dead, not always gone. Sometimes they were just not spoken about. A cousin who moved away but never called, an aunt whose photos were removed from frames, a name that would start to form on someone's tongue, then disappear. If I ask questions, I get the same answer every time. Don't dig up what the land buried. The first time I tried to push, my mother grabbed my face with both hands and said, "Listen to me. The land doesn't take. It trades." Trades. That word stayed with me because it made everything feel intentional, like we weren't victims of bad luck, like someone, somewhere, had agreed to something. And the longer I lived in that house, the more I realized the real curse wasn't the river. It was in the silence. When I was 16, I heard the basement door open. Our basement wasn't a normal basement. It wasn't storage. It wasn't laundry. It was off limits. Always locked. Always. Even during parties. Even during storms. But that night, at 2:14 a.m., I heard the lock click. I sat up in bed. The house was still. Then I heard footsteps, slow and careful, moving downward. I don't know what possessed me, but I got up and followed. At the top of the basement stairs, I saw my mother. She held a lantern in one hand and something wrapped in cloth in the other. She didn't notice me at first, but then the lantern light shifted and she turned. Her eyes widened, not with anger, with fear, real fear. She whispered, "Go back to bed." I asked her what she was doing. She didn't answer. She just said, "It's not time." And then she stepped down the stairs and closed the door. I waited. I listened. From behind the door, I heard a sound I still can't explain. Not a voice, not a scream, more like wet breathing, like something alive was pressed against the other side, waiting for her. I stood there shaking, realizing two things at once. My mother was hiding something beneath our house, and she wasn't hiding it from strangers. She was hiding it from me. By the time I turned 24, I made my decision. I was done. Done with the whispers. Done with the locked rooms. Done with being marked by a place I didn't choose. I moved to the city. A clean apartment. A clean start. Concrete. Streetlights. Crowds. No river. No stone. No old chapel bell. Just normal life. For the first 2 weeks, I slept like I'd been holding my breath my whole life and finally let it out. Then, on the 15th night, I woke up thirsty. I walked to the kitchen, and the sink was running. Not dripping. Running. A steady stream like someone had just turned it on. I froze, staring at the water, and then I smelled it. Not chlorine. Not city water. River water. That damp metallic scent, like wet earth and old stone. My skin went cold, because there is no river near my apartment. But the water smelled like childhood. It smelled like the ritual. And when I leaned closer, I saw something in the stream. A thin line of dark red. So faint I almost convinced myself it was a light, until it touched my fingertip. And the moment it did, the bathroom mirror down the hall fogged up from the inside. From that night on, the city stopped feeling safe. Not because something chased me down the street. Not because I saw monsters. It was worse than that. It was subtle. It was familiar. Like something had moved in quietly and started rearranging my life the way it liked it. My phone would play audio at night, static mixed with something like distant singing. My doorbell would ring once at 3:03 a.m., and when I checked the camera, nothing. But the footage would glitch just for 1 second, showing a frame that didn't belong. A frame of tall grass. A frame of dark water. A frame of the old stone by the river. It was like the land was sending reminders. I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was stressed, homesick, overworked. Then my mother called. I hadn't told her anything. Not about the sink. Not about the mirror. Nothing. But she said in a voice too calm, "It found you." I couldn't speak. She continued, "You can leave the land, but you can't leave the agreement." I asked her what agreement. She went quiet for so long, I thought the call dropped. Then she said something I will never forget. "We promised a firstborn so the rest of us could live." My mouth went dry. My hands started shaking. Because if that was true, then what did that make me? 2 days later, a letter arrived at my apartment. No return address. The paper was thick, old-fashioned. Inside was a document, official, stamped, signed, an inheritance from my grandmother. I hadn't known she'd left me anything. My first thought was relief. Money, help, safety. Then I saw the last line. A condition. Property transfer conditional upon return to land within 30 days. It felt like my lungs collapsed, because my grandmother had never wanted me to escape. She wanted me to come back. And suddenly, the sink running, the mirror fogging, the footage glitching. It wasn't random. It was a pull, a leash. And the moment I realized that, I also realized something worse. The inheritance wasn't a gift. It was a summons. I drove back to the far with my hands clenched so hard my fingers went numb. The closer I got, the heavier the air felt, like the sky was pressing down. When I arrived, the house looked smaller than I remembered, but the silence was louder. My mother opened the door. She looked older, tired in a way sleep can't fix. She hugged me, but her arms trembled. Inside, the house smelled like candle wax and damp wood. I asked where my grandmother's will was kept. My mother pointed to the dining table, and there was another document beside it, a church letter, stamped with the chapel seal. Blessing declined. I stared at it, confused. My mother said the priest refused. I asked why. She swallowed, then whispered. He said the symbol on our land isn't a symbol. It's a claim. That night, as the wind moved through the fields, I heard it. A bell. One single note. And from somewhere on the floorboards, the same wet breathing I heard at 16. Only this time, it sounded closer, like it knew I was home. And that's when my mother finally told me the part she'd hidden my entire life. I wasn't just marked at the river. I was promised there. My mother didn't drag me to the river. She didn't force me. She simply laid out the cloth-wrapped item I'd seen years ago. Inside was a small wooden carving. Old, cracked, a figure with no face. She sat on the table and lit a candle. Then she said, quietly, like someone reading a sentence they hate, "Your grandmother made the deal when you were born sick." I said nothing. My throat burned. She continued, "The church tried to cleanse it. It didn't work. So we did what the land asked. We offered what it wanted." I whispered, "Who?" My mother's eyes filled with tears. But she didn't cry. She said, "The firstborn." She looked at me, then really looked, and I realized what I had always avoided. In our family, love wasn't the strongest force. Fear was. And fear had shaped every decision they made. I asked, "So why am I still here?" My mother hesitated. Then she said, "Because the land accepted a different payment." My voice shook. "Who?" My mother's lips parted, then closed. And in that small silence, I understood there was a name we didn't speak. A missing firstborn. A person erased from photographs. It wasn't a story. It was a sacrifice. And if the land took someone from me, then the land still had a reason to want me. I wish I could tell you I fought it. I wish I could tell you I smashed the carving, burned the papers, and ran away again. But the truth is, by the time you learn, your whole life has been shaped by a deal you didn't sign. You start to understand why people stop running. That night, I went to the river alone. The trees leaned inward as they remembered me. The stone was still there. The carvings felt warmer than they should have. I stood at the edge and watched the water move. And I didn't see a monster. I didn't see a demon. I saw something worse. A pattern, a cycle, a debt passed down like a family heirloom. I dipped my fingers into the river. The water was cold, but it didn't feel unfamiliar. It felt like home. And that's when I realized the most tragic truth of all. The curse wasn't chasing me. It was waiting for me to stop running. So I stood there, breathing the damp air, and I whispered the only thing I could honestly say. Okay. Not because I wanted it, but because I finally understood. I was raised inside it. And as I walked back to the house, the chapel bell rang once softly like an ending, or maybe like an agreement renewed. If you're still here, you're probably feeling that heavy quiet in your chest. That's the part that lingers. Because some families don't pass down recipes or jewelry. They pass down things they're ashamed to name. In the next video on Unseen Life Drama, I'm telling the story of a woman who inherits a house in the city and discovers the basement isn't a basement. It's a mouth. And the worst part? Her family has been feeding it for generations. So if you want the next story, subscribe. Because there are some traditions you don't inherit. You survive them.